Her father's hand came down across her face before the ink on the marriage contract was even dry. Charlotte did not make a sound. She stood in the parlor of the Hayes estate, her husband's house, a house she had lived in for exactly 19 days, and she tasted blood on the inside of her cheek, and she did not move, and she did not cry, and she looked at her father with eyes that had stopped asking him for anything a very long time ago. And that was the moment Nathaniel Whitaker Hayes walked through the door. If you have ever wondered what it looks like when a cold man finally feels something, subscribe to this channel. Stay until the very last word, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning Charlotte Avery Monroe got married, her father straightened his cravat in the mirror and did not once look at her. She stood in the doorway of his dressing room in a dress his housekeeper had pressed the night before, plain white muslin, no lace, no pearl buttons, because there had been no money left for pearl buttons, and she watched him fuss with the silk at his throat, and she understood something she had always known but never said aloud. He was more nervous than she was, because he had more to lose. "You look presentable," Charles Beaumont Monroe said, finally glancing at her. His eyes moved the way a man checks a horse before sending it to auction. Quick, efficient, looking for anything that might reduce the price. "Thank you, Father." "Don't thank me. Thank God Hayes agreed to this at all." He turned back to the mirror. A man like that could have anyone in Virginia. Could have anyone in the whole of the eastern states. "He chose you because I asked him to. You remember that." "I will remember it," Charlotte said. She meant something entirely different than he did. She always did. The church in Harrowfield, Kentucky, smelled of pine resin and cold stone, and every eye in it landed on Charlotte Monroe the moment she stepped through the door. Not the way eyes land on a bride. The way eyes land on something slightly wrong. She heard the whispers without straining. Stone churches carry sound, the way they carry prayer, effortlessly, indifferently to every corner. Monroe's girl thought he had more pride than this. Hayes must be desperate. Poor creature, she knows exactly what this is. She kept her chin level. Her mother had taught her that. You can feel everything you want on the inside, Charlotte Rose. But you keep your chin level, you do not give them the satisfaction. Nathaniel Whitaker Hayes stood at the altar like a man awaiting a business meeting he had already decided the outcome of. Tall, dark-haired, 35 years old and never married, which everyone in 3 counties had an opinion about. He had turned down every match his mother's social circle had tried to make for him. He had built a modest inheritance into the largest private estate between the mountains and the river through cold, careful, relentless work, and he looked it. He looked every inch of it. But when Charlotte reached the altar and his eyes finally met hers, she felt something she had not prepared herself for. Not contempt, not cruelty. Something worse for a woman standing in a wedding dress. Indifference. His gaze registered her the way a man registers a piece of furniture. He's agreed to accept briefly, efficiently, without pleasure or displeasure, and then moved past her to some middle distance that had nothing to do with her at all. The minister began. Charlotte said what she was meant to say, placed her hand where she was told, felt Nathaniel Hayes slide a ring onto her finger with the care a man uses when signing a document he has already read and found satisfactory. She thought, this is what my life costs. This is the exact price of it. Afterward in the vestibule, while her father worked the room like a man who had not just auctioned off his eldest daughter, Nathaniel Hayes came to stand beside her. "Mrs. Hayes." She turned. Up close he was even more contained than he'd appeared from across the church. Controlled. Every line of him decided. "Mr. Hayes, we should be clear with each other from the beginning," he said. "No apology, no softening. The way a man states terms. I agreed to this arrangement because it serves both our families. I have no expectation beyond that. I expect you to run the household, to be civil. I won't interfere with how you spend your time within reason. In return, you'll have the Hayes name and the financial security that comes with it." Charlotte looked at him steadily. "You expect an arrangement," she said. "Yes." "And you want me to confirm I understand that?" "Yes." She held his gaze one beat longer than he seemed to expect. Something moved in his expression. Brief, almost nothing. a flicker of something that might have been curiosity before it was gone. "I understand it perfectly, Mr. Hayes," she said. "And I'll be clear in return. I'm not here looking for sentiment. I'm here because I had no other choice. That's the truth, and I believe you deserve the truth rather than a performance." She paused. "We may yet surprise each other." He studied her. 2 seconds. 3. Then he said, "Unlikely," put his hat on, and walked across the room. Charlotte watched him go. Then she turned to the window and gave herself exactly 30 seconds of something that had no proper name, not grief, not rage, something in between, and then she put her chin level and went to find a glass of water. The Hayes estate sat 7 miles east of Harrowfield, at the end of a road that cut through fields going on forever. Charlotte arrived alone. Nathaniel had ridden ahead on horseback and saw no reason to explain this. She arrived with 2 trunks, a satchel holding her ledger books, her mother's Bible, and a small watercolor of a garden that had never existed, painted by her mother from pure imagination. The housekeeper waiting at the door was a tall, sharp-boned woman named Mrs. Aldrich, 20 years with the Hayes family, and she looked at the new Mrs. Hayes the way a woman looks at a mistake she has seen coming for some time. "I'll show you to your rooms, ma'am." "Thank you." Charlotte set her satchel down. "Before you do, I'd like to see the household ledgers, full accounts, everything from the past year." Mrs. Aldrich's chin came up. "The ledgers, ma'am?" "Yes. Mr. Hayes hasn't given instructions that—" "Mr. Hayes is my husband," Charlotte said pleasantly, without any give in it whatsoever. "Which makes me mistress of this house. I would like to see the ledgers." The silence that followed was long enough to be its own statement. "I'll have them brought to the study," Mrs. Aldrich said finally. "The kitchen table will be fine." Charlotte picked up her satchel. "Better light, and people talk more freely in kitchens." She let a small smile through. "That includes housekeepers." Mrs. Aldrich stared at her. Then just slightly, just barely, one corner of the housekeeper's mouth shifted into something that was not yet a smile, but might become one given enough time and enough evidence. "Kitchen table it is then," she said. The first week was the loneliest of Charlotte's life. That was saying something considerable. Nathaniel left before dawn, returned after dark. When he came to dinner 4 nights out of 7, if that, he was polite and quiet, and about as present as a portrait of a man. The household staff watched her the way people watch something they haven't decided about yet. Not hostile, not friendly, waiting. She understood waiting. She had done it her whole life, but she was done with it now. The second morning she was in the kitchen before the cook arrived, going through the supply invoices with a methodical patience that made the cook, a stout woman named Bess, stop in the doorway and stare. "Ma'am, is something wrong?" "Not yet," Charlotte said without looking up. "But this butcher is overcharging you by 30% on cured pork. Has been for at least 8 months based on what I'm seeing here." She turned to Paige. "Do you have a preference for which supplier you move to, or shall I find you one?" Bess stared at her. "The butcher's been with the family 20 years, ma'am." "He's been stealing from the family for 8 months. Charlotte looked up. "Those aren't the same thing, Bess." A long pause. "I reckon they ain't," Bess said slowly. "I'll find you a better supplier by the end of the week." Charlotte turned back to the invoices. "In the meantime, what's for breakfast? I've been up since 4, and I'm half starved." Something in Bess's face changed. Not much, just enough. "Biscuits and gravy," she said. "I'll bring you a plate, ma'am." The mill was next. Charlotte walked the half-mile to the grain mill on a Tuesday morning and found a foreman named William Teague overseeing the unloading of a wagon with the expression of a man deeply accustomed to problems he has no power to fix. "Mr. Teague." He turned, looked at her. His expression went through several calculations in approximately 2 seconds. "Mrs. Hayes." He pulled his hat off. "Ma'am, didn't expect—" "No one ever does." She came to stand beside him and looked at the grain coming off the wagon. Even she, who had never set foot in a mill before last week, could see something was off. The color was wrong. The consistency was wrong. "This is what's coming in from the northern farms." Teague looked at the grain, back at her. Yes, ma'am. And this has been the quality all season. About half the season. He turned his hat in his hands. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but how do you... I've been reading the yield reports. The output per bushel numbers started dropping 6 months ago, and the drop tracks exactly with when the northern contracts were renewed. She looked at him directly. The contracts reward volume, not quality, so the farmers give you volume. Teague was quiet for a moment. That's... He stopped. Started again. That's exactly right, ma'am. I told Mr. Hayes that back in the spring, but I couldn't... He stopped again. I couldn't explain it the way you just did. Have you got the contract documents? In the office. Then let's go look at them. He looked at her for one more moment. Then he put his hat back on and said, Yes, ma'am, and meant it differently than he had the first time. She rewrote the contract framework that night by candlelight at the kitchen table, working until her hand cramped and the candle burned low. Quality penalties for inconsistent grade. Premium payments for farms that maintain standards across a full season. Simple incentive structure. The kind of thing that should have been in the original contract, but wasn't, because whoever drew it up had been thinking about volume, and not about what volume actually meant when quality wasn't controlled. She left the document on the kitchen table in the morning. In the afternoon, it was gone. She didn't ask who had taken it. 3 days later, Nathaniel Hayes set a piece of paper beside her dinner plate. Her framework. Her handwriting. With notes in the margins, slanted, precise, careful, that she had not put there. Workable said one note beside the quality penalty clause. Where did you learn sourcing contracts, said another. And at the bottom, in the same precise hand, I'll have Morrison draft the final language. Review his draft before I sign. Charlotte looked up. Nathaniel was looking at his plate. I'll review the draft, she said. Good, he said. That was all. But when he left the table that night, he paused at the door just briefly, just a half-second longer than necessary, and she felt the weight of that pause without being able to read it. She didn't make too much of it, but she didn't make nothing of it either. The neighbor arrived on a Wednesday. Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield, wife of the largest adjacent landowner, appeared at the front door with 2 women. Charlotte didn't know, and a basket of preserves that was clearly a prop rather than a gift. Charlotte came to the parlor, and Mrs. Whitfield looked her over with the particular thoroughness of a woman conducting an inspection she intends to report on. My dear, Mrs. Whitfield said warmly, the way women say my dear when they mean something else entirely. We've been so curious about you. We've heard so very little. That's probably accurate, Charlotte said. I've only been here 3 weeks. Of course, of course. Mrs. Whitfield sat without being invited to, and her 2 companions followed. We knew Nathaniel's mother quite well. Wonderful woman. Very particular about everything really. She smiled all her teeth. You must find it quite overwhelming. Running an estate like this. A woman of your background. The word background did a great deal of work in that sentence. Charlotte sat across from her. I find it interesting, she said. The mill accounts alone have kept me busy for 2 weeks. We're restructuring the sourcing contracts. I expect yield to improve significantly by spring. Mrs. Whitfield blinked. This was not the response she had prepared for. The mill accounts. And the household supply costs. We had a supplier situation that needed addressing, but those are sorted now. Charlotte folded her hands in her lap. What brings you out today, Mrs. Whitfield? I imagine it's not really the preserves. One of the companion women made a small sound. Mrs. Whitfield's smile thinned considerably. I simply wanted to welcome you, she said. That's kind. Charlotte stood, which was a very clear signal that the visit was over. I'll have Mrs. Aldrich show you out. I have accounts to get back to. Mrs. Whitfield stood. Her companion stood. Something moved behind the older woman's eyes. Not quite respect, but the thing that comes just before respect. The moment when a person recalculates what they are dealing with. Perhaps, Mrs. Whitfield said carefully, you might join us for the ladies' gathering next month. Perhaps, Charlotte said. I'll check my schedule. She said it the way a busy woman says it. Not the way a lonely woman says it. Mrs. Whitfield noticed the difference. Charlotte could see that she noticed. Good. That afternoon, one of the younger household maids, a girl of maybe 17, named Polly, who had been watching Charlotte with barely concealed skepticism for 3 weeks, came to the kitchen while Charlotte was working and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and said without any preamble at all, "The last housekeeper, Mr. Hayes, had she tried to reorganize the linen room, and Mrs. Aldrich didn't speak to her for a month." Charlotte looked up from the ledger. "Is that right? And the one before that tried to change the dinner menu and cook quit for a week." Polly's chin was up. "I'm just saying. Some women come here thinking they can change everything, and they can't." "I'm not trying to change everything," Charlotte said. "You changed the butcher. The butcher was stealing. You changed the mill contracts. The contracts were losing money. You told Mrs. Whitfield to leave. Mrs. Whitfield left when she was ready." Charlotte tilted her head slightly. "What are you actually asking me, Polly?" The girl was quiet for a moment. Her arms came uncrossed. "I'm asking," she said more quietly, "if you're going to stay, or if you're going to, go back." Charlotte looked at her. "Go back where?" she said. Polly didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both understood what she meant. Go back to being the woman who came here as a debt payment. Go back to being invisible. Go back to the version of Charlotte Monroe who stood in a wedding dress, feeling like a piece of furniture, and did not cry. "I'm not going anywhere," Charlotte said. "Mr. Hayes. Mr. Hayes married me," Charlotte said. "Whatever his reasons were, this is my house now too." She looked back at the ledger. "Are you good with numbers, Polly?" A beat of silence. "I somewhat, ma'am. Sit down. I'll show you what I'm working on. Extra pair of eyes never hurt." Polly stared at her. Then she sat down. And Charlotte went back to work, because she always went back to work, because work was the one thing that had never lied to her, never leveraged her, never looked through her like she wasn't there. Work was honest. Work was hers. It was a Thursday evening when her father came back. Charlotte was in the mill office. Morrison's draft of the new sourcing contracts, she had found 6 clauses that needed revision and was annotating in the margins in red when she heard the carriage on the road. She knew it before she looked up. She knew the sound of that carriage the way you know a sound you have spent years dreading. William Teague was across the room. He heard her go still and looked over and read something in her face. "Ma'am." "My father," she said. Teague set down his papers. Charles Monroe descended from the carriage with the performance of a man arriving to collect something owed to him. His best coat, his silver-headed stick, his most prosperous expression, which Charlotte knew was the most expensive thing he still owned because everything else had been sold. He came into the mill office without knocking. He looked at Teague. He looked at Charlotte. He spread his arms. "My dear girl." He had never called her his dear girl in her life. "Father," she said, "you look well." He looked around the office with an expression she knew. Proprietary, assessing the look of a man who considers everything he can see to belong to him in some essential way. "Keeping busy, I see." "We were in the middle of reviewing contracts," Charlotte said. "Mr. Teague, you remember where we were." Now. Her father waved a hand at Teague. "Give us a moment, son." "Mr. Teague stays," Charlotte said. The room went quiet. Her father's smile recalculated. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Whatever you prefer, my dear." He sat down across from her without being invited and set his walking stick across his knees. "I've come to see how you're settling in." A father worries. "You have never worried about me in your life," Charlotte said. "Why are you here?" He looked at her. The warm performance slipped just for a moment, the way a mask slips when the man underneath it shifts. "I need $15,000, he said. She had expected a number. She had not expected it to be 15. "There's an opportunity in Charlottesville," he continued. "Land purchase. The kind of thing that could rebuild the Monroe name. The window is short end of the month. You're a Hayes now, Charlotte. That means resources. That means access." "I have no access to $15,000, she said. "You're his wife. I manage a household allowance, and I have earned the trust of the mill foreman through 3 weeks of actual work." Her voice was level. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her mother had taught her that too: when you want to hold your ground, be still. Men expect you to move. I cannot give you money that is not mine to give, and I would not give it to you if it were. Her father set his walking stick on the desk. The small sound of it was deliberate. You ungrateful girl, he said. Low, flat. The voice she had heard since childhood, the one that came after the performance, failed the one that didn't bother with warmth anymore. Do you understand what I gave you? I gave you this. He gestured at the room, at the estate beyond it, at all of it. I gave you a future, a name, a position. Without me, you'd have been nothing. 24 years old and going nowhere, and You traded me, Charlotte said, to clear your debt. Those are the facts of what happened. I'm not interested in another version of them. He stood up. She did not move. Teague shifted just slightly, just a quarter step forward, and that small movement made her father pause. I'll be back, he said, and you will reconsider. He left. Charlotte waited until she heard the carriage move. Then she uncapped her pen. Clause 4, she said to Teague. The penalty structure. I think we need to add a grace period for weather events. What do you think? Teague looked at her for a moment. I think, he said slowly, that you are the toughest woman I have ever met, ma'am. That's kind, Charlotte said. But I reckon we've still got 6 clauses to review before dark. He came back on a Thursday. This time, Nathaniel was home. Charlotte heard her father's voice in the front hall before she reached the stairs, that carrying consequential voice, the one designed to fill rooms and communicate importance. She came down and found him already in the parlor, hat off, seated, behaving like a man who had been invited. Nathaniel stood at the window with his hands behind his back. He was listening. He always listened before he acted. Charlotte had learned that about him in 3 weeks. He was a man who gathered information, the way some men gather weapons quietly without announcing it, and then used what he'd gathered with precision. Her father stood when she entered. Charlotte. Wide smile. Full warmth. The best performance. I was just telling your husband what a remarkable woman you've become. Your mother, God rest her, would have been so proud. He invoked her mother the way he always had, as a lever, as a sentiment designed to stop her from thinking. Charlotte watched his hands. He was holding his hat. When her father held his hat, it meant he was still working, still calculating. Hadn't gotten what he wanted yet. We've had such a nice chat, he continued, turning to Nathaniel with the man-to-man register he used when he thought it would work. Your wife is quite an asset, Hayes. Quite a woman. I always said so. Nathaniel looked at him. Did you? He said. Not a question. Her father recalibrated, smiled wider, leaned forward slightly confidential, as if the 3 of them were simply old friends working something out. The thing is with the connection between our families. Now the Hayes resources, the Monroe name. It seems to me there's a natural alignment here. What I'm proposing is really more of a family investment. 15,000 short-term. No, Nathaniel said. The word landed like a door closing. Her father blinked. I beg your... No. There will be no transfer of funds. Not 15,000. Not any amount. Nathaniel turned from the window fully, and the quality of his attention shifted the air in the room. I want to be clear, Mr. Monroe, because I understand you are a man who sometimes hears what he wishes to hear instead of what is said. So I will say it simply. You will not receive money from this household. You will not use your daughter as a conduit for your financial schemes. And you will not return to this property under the pretense of a family visit when your purpose is negotiation. Her father's face did something Charlotte had seen before the mask, deciding whether to stay or drop. It dropped. He turned to her. You did this, he said, low, certain. You turned him against me, after everything, after what I sacrificed. You sacrificed nothing, Charlotte said. You spent everything and sold me to recover what you'd lost. I have been very precise about that. He crossed the parlor. She stood her ground. She did not move, because she had learned 24 years of learning what men like him could not tolerate. They could not tolerate a woman who did not flinch. His hand came up. Nathaniel Hayes moved. 3 strides, fast and absolute. He put himself between Charlotte and her father close enough that Charles Monroe's raised hand stopped in the air between them, close enough that the two men were eye to eye, and everything in the room contracted down to that space between them. Nathaniel did not touch him. He didn't need to. He simply stood there between them and looked at Charles Monroe with eyes that had all the warmth of a Kentucky winter, and his stillness was more absolute and more dangerous than anything physical would have been. The silence lasted 4 seconds. They were the longest 4 seconds of Charlotte's life. "You forgot something," Nathaniel said quietly. Quietly was the most dangerous way he said anything. "She is not your daughter to discipline anymore. She is not your property to manage. She is not your asset to liquidate." A pause. "She is my wife, and you will never raise your hand in her direction again." Her father lowered his hand. For the first time, the very first time in Charlotte's memory, Charles Beaumont Monroe looked small, not defeated. Men like him were never quite defeated, but diminished, recalculated, faced with a wall he had not expected and could not talk his way through. "This isn't finished," he said. "It is," Nathaniel said. "Leave this house." Charles Monroe picked up his hat. He walked past Nathaniel. He walked past Charlotte without looking at her. She had once spent years trying to make him look at her. She was done with that now. The front door opened. The front door closed. Nathaniel turned around. He looked at her. And for the first time since the altar in Harrowfield, since the moment he had looked through her as though she were furniture he had agreed to receive, she saw him look at her the way one person looks at another. Like she was there. Like she was real. Like what had just happened in this room was something that mattered. "Charlotte," he said. His voice had changed. Something in it she hadn't heard before. "I'm all right," she said. "I know you are." He held her gaze. "That's not why I'm asking." She looked at him. In 24 years, no one had ever made that distinction. No one had ever noticed that "I'm fine" and "I'm fine" were two entirely different sentences. "Are you all right?" he said again, in the way that means actually all right, not in the way that means you've decided to be. Something moved in her chest that she had no name for yet. "I don't entirely know," she said, which was the most honest answer she had given anyone in years. He nodded. Slow. "That's a fair answer," he said. He left her there. She heard him in the study, the scratch of his pen picking up where it had left off. She stood in the middle of the parlor and breathed. Outside, her father's carriage was moving down the road, getting smaller. She did not watch it go. She turned away before it reached the gate deliberately, completely, and she straightened her spine, and she picked up the sourcing contract revision from the side table where she'd set it when she'd heard her father's voice in the hall. 6 clauses still to review. Work was honest. Work was hers. Work had never once raised a hand to her. She walked to the kitchen table, sat down, uncapped her pen, and then she stopped. Because she heard footsteps, not leaving the house, coming back toward the kitchen. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. He said nothing for a moment. He looked at the contract papers spread across the table. He looked at the pen in her hand. He looked at her face. Then he said, "Morrison's draft has a gap in the arbitration clause, paragraph 9. She blinked. "I saw that," she said. "What's your fix?" "Binding county mediation before any civil action, 30-day window." He was quiet for a moment. "That's better than what I had," he said. He didn't leave. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and the two of them worked through the contract revisions at the kitchen table by candlelight in near silence, with only the scratch of 2 pens and the occasional word between them, and it was the most honest, most equal, most unexpectedly human evening Charlotte Avery Monroe had spent in 24 years of living. She did not make too much of it, but she did not make nothing of it. Not this time. Not anymore. The contract was signed on a Friday morning, and by Friday afternoon, every farm foreman on the northern supply route had heard about it. Charlotte knew because William Teague told her, and Teague knew because the wagon drivers told him, and the wagon drivers knew because word travels fast in Kentucky when money is involved and the terms have changed. "They ain't happy," Teague said. He was leaning against the mill office doorframe with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man who has been waiting a long time for someone to do what she had just done, and is not entirely sure how to feel about it now that it's happened. Harmon from the North Ridge came by this morning. Said the new penalty clauses were unreasonable. Said no farmer in the county would agree to quality standards they couldn't control. What did you tell him? Charlotte asked without looking up from the ledger she was reviewing. Told him the standards were based on what he was already producing before last season, so if he couldn't meet them, something changed on his end, and that was worth looking at. She looked up. That was exactly right, she said. Teague shifted his weight. He didn't like it. No, she agreed. He wouldn't. She closed the ledger. How many of the northern farms have signed? 4 out of 9. Which 5 haven't? He listed them. She listened. She recognized 3 of the names from the account book's farms, whose yield records showed the sharpest drops, farms whose volume had gone up while quality went down. Farms that had been profiting most from the old contract's blindness. Set up meetings, she said. All 5, this week if possible. You want to meet with them yourself? Yes. Teague was quiet for a moment. Ma'am, these are men who've been doing business with the Hayes family for 20 years. They're not going to take kindly to what, she said. He stopped. To me, she finished without heat, without self-pity, simply as a fact. Say it plainly, Mr. Teague. They're not going to take kindly to a woman sitting across from them at a negotiating table. I was going to say to change, he said carefully. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, set up the meetings. He set up the meetings. The first one was a disaster. A man named Jacob Harmon arrived at the mill office on Monday morning with his oldest son and the body language of someone who had decided before he walked in the door that he was not going to agree to anything. He was 60 years old, thick-shouldered, with the hands of a man who had worked land his whole life and the eyes of a man who considered that work to grant him a particular kind of authority. He sat down across from Charlotte, looked at her for approximately 4 seconds, and then looked at Teague. I thought Hayes was going to be here, he said. Mr. Hayes has delegated the contract negotiations, Teague said. To who? To me, Charlotte said. Harmon looked at her again. His son looked at the floor. I've been supplying this mill for 19 years, Harmon said. He said it to Teague. Then you'll want to keep supplying it, Charlotte said. Mr. Harmon, look at me, please. He looked at her, slowly. The look of a man making a point by complying. Your yield dropped 14% last season, she said. Your quality grade dropped from a consistent B+ to a C-. Your volume went up. That combination tells me you're spreading your soil thin, planting more acreage than you can properly manage, and compensating with irrigation shortcuts. She opened the folder in front of her and turned it to face him. This is your last 4 years of output data. The pattern is right there. Harmon looked at the data. His son very slightly leaned forward. The new contract gives you 12 months to bring quality back up, Charlotte continued. Premium payments kick in at B grade and above. The penalty only applies if you fall below C. That's a wide window, Mr. Harmon. I'm not trying to penalize you. I'm trying to give you a reason to fix what's already going wrong on your farm before it gets worse. A long silence. How do you know about soil management? Harmon said. I read, Charlotte said. And I listen. And I look at numbers until they tell me what they're trying to say. She folded her hands on the desk. I also know that the Harmon farm has been in your family for 3 generations. I would like it to be there for a 4th. That's why I'm sitting here instead of simply canceling the contract. Harmon was quiet. His son said quietly to his father, Pa, she's right about the north acreage. Harmon shot his son a look. Then he looked back at Charlotte. I want a 30-day grace period for weather events, he said. It's already in paragraph 11, she said. He picked up the contract and found paragraph 11. He read it. He put it back down. Fine, he said, and signed. The other 4 were harder. One refused outright and left without signing, and Charlotte let him go without raising her voice or changing her expression. And Teague looked at her afterward and said, You're not going to go after him. And she said, I'll give him 2 weeks. He'll hear what the others signed for, and he'll come back. She was right. He came back in 11 days. 2 more signed after revision discussions that ran 3 hours apiece. Charlotte held every line she had drawn except one minor clause about delivery scheduling, and she gave on that one deliberately because giving on one small thing allowed the men across from her to feel that they had won something, and men who felt they had won something signed contracts with better attitudes than men who felt they had lost everything. She had learned that from watching her father negotiate. It was one of the few useful things he had taught her. The last holdout was a man named Cooper, who was 53 stubborn and made it clear within the first 5 minutes that his objection was not to the contract terms, but to her. "I don't do business with women," he said, simply, like stating a weather fact. Charlotte looked at him. "That's interesting," she said. "Because you've been doing business with this mill for 11 years, and for the last 3 weeks, every decision this mill has made has been mine." She paused. "So you've been doing business with me. You just didn't know it." Cooper stared at her. "The contract is fair," she said. "The numbers support it. You know that, or you wouldn't still be sitting here. You'd have left like you threatened to do 20 minutes ago." She leaned forward slightly. "Sign it, Mr. Cooper. Not because I'm asking you to. Because it's the right business decision and you're smart enough to know it." He signed. He didn't thank her. She didn't need him to. Nathaniel heard about the Cooper meeting from Teague before Charlotte had the chance to mention it herself, which she had not been planning to do at dinner that night because she'd had a long day and Cooper had been exhausting and she didn't particularly feel like discussing it. But Nathaniel brought it up. They were at the dinner table, both present, which was becoming more frequent, though neither of them remarked on it, and he said without looking up from his plate, "Teague tells me Cooper signed." "He did," Charlotte said. "Teague also tells me Cooper made it difficult." "Mr. Teague talks a great deal," Charlotte said. "He admires you," Nathaniel said. "Men who admire someone tend to tell their stories." She looked at him. He was still looking at his plate, but there was something at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile and was more than nothing. "Cooper will be fine," she said. "He needed to feel heard. He does now." "You gave him something in the negotiation." "The delivery scheduling clause. It cost us nothing meaningful, and it gave him the feeling of a win." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "That's—" He stopped, picked up his water glass, set it down. "That's a more sophisticated negotiating approach than most men I deal with use." "Most men you deal with are not managing someone else's hostility and their own credibility at the same time," Charlotte said. "It takes more precision." The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind of silence that had weight to it, the kind that meant someone was thinking about what had just been said and finding it worth thinking about. "All 9 contracts," he said finally. "All 9. In 3 weeks." "Yes." He looked up at her, all the way up. The full gray weight of his attention, the way it landed when he decided to actually look at something instead of past it. "That's—" He stopped again. "You don't have to say anything, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Nathaniel," he said. She blinked. "We've been married a month," he said. "I think you can manage my first name." She held his gaze for a moment. "Nathaniel," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Small, precise, like a door opening a 1/4 inch and then stopping. "The yield projections for spring," he said, looking back at his plate. "I'd like you to review them before I take them to the bank." "All right," she said. "Tomorrow morning. I'll be in the mill office by 7. 6, he said. 6 then, she said, and neither of them said anything else for the rest of dinner, but the silence was different now. Not the silence of 2 strangers tolerating each other's presence across a table. Something else. Something that didn't have a name yet, but was beginning slowly and carefully, and without announcement, to become one. The trouble arrived on a Wednesday, the way most serious trouble does without warning, wrapped in something that looked ordinary. Charlotte was in the mill office at 7:30 in the morning, going over the spring projections she and Nathaniel had worked through the week before, when Polly appeared in the doorway out of breath, and with the look of someone who has been moving fast, and is not sure whether what she is carrying is news or catastrophe. "Ma'am, there's a woman at the house." Charlotte looked up. "What woman?" "Says her name is Mrs. Isabel Ford. She says she's a friend of Mr. Hayes, an old friend." Polly's expression was doing something complicated. "She arrived with 3 trunks, ma'am." Charlotte set down her pen. 3 trunks was not a social call. "Where is she now?" "Mrs. Aldrich put her in the front parlor." Mrs. Aldrich didn't look pleased. "Mrs. Aldrich is rarely pleased," Charlotte said. She stood and straightened her jacket. "Thank you, Polly." She walked back to the house at her normal pace. She did not hurry. Hurrying communicated alarm, and whatever was in the front parlor, Charlotte was not going to walk into it alarmed. Isabel Ford was perhaps 30 and beautiful in the way that women are beautiful when they have known it their whole lives and built their entire understanding of the world around it. Dark hair, perfect posture, dressed for travel in a way that still managed to look like a statement. She stood when Charlotte entered and smiled with the warmth of a woman who is accustomed to other women feeling small in her presence. "You must be Charlotte," she said. "How lovely. Nathaniel described you as—" A small pause, perfectly timed. "Capable." There was that word again. Charlotte looked at her steadily. "Mrs. Ford," she said, "I don't believe we've been introduced. Isabel, please. I've known Nathaniel for years. We were very close before he—" Another perfect beat of timing. "Before circumstances changed. I'm passing through Kentucky on my way to my sister's, and he did insist some time ago that if I was ever in the area, I should stay." She glanced around the parlor. "He hasn't changed a thing, has he? It's exactly as I remember." "When were you last here?" Charlotte asked. "Oh, 2 years ago, perhaps 3. She sat back down as though it were her parlor to sit in. "I hope it's not an inconvenience." "Not at all," Charlotte said. "Mrs. Aldrich will have a room prepared. How long are you staying?" "Oh, I couldn't say. A few days at least. Of course." Charlotte kept her expression pleasantly neutral, the expression she had perfected over 24 years of keeping her face still while her mind worked. "I'll let Nathaniel know you've arrived. He's at the North Mill this morning." "He always was an early riser." Isabel smiled, the smile that had probably stopped many conversations in their tracks. "You must find him terribly difficult to get to know." "We manage," Charlotte said. She left the parlor and went directly to find Nathaniel. She found him at the North Mill, talking with 2 of the construction workers about a water wheel repair. He saw her coming, and something in his face sharpened. He had learned, she realized, to read her the way she had learned to read him. He excused himself from the workers and came toward her. "What happened?" "A woman named Isabel Ford has arrived at the house," Charlotte said. "With 3 trunks. She says you told her she could stay if she was passing through." The expression that moved across his face was brief and complex, and told her several things at once. "I said that 2 years ago," he said. Before we were married," Charlotte said. "Yes." "She's very beautiful," Charlotte said, evenly, as a simple observation. "Charlotte, I'm not asking you about her," she said. "I'm telling you she's in your parlor with 3 trunks and the clear intention of staying, and I thought you should know so you could decide what you wanted to do about it." She looked at him directly. "This is your house. She's your guest. I'll be civil." "It's your house," he said. She looked at him. "It is your house," he said again, firmly. "As much as mine." He pulled off his work gloves. "I'll come back now." "You don't have to." "I'll come back now," he said. Lunch was an exercise in Charlotte watching 2 people navigate a history she had no map for. Isabel Ford was charming. That was the only word for it, not in a false way, not obviously performed, but in the practiced, polished way of a woman who had spent years making herself essential to the rooms she walked into. She told stories well. She made Nathaniel laugh once, a short, surprised sound, the kind that gets pulled out of a man against his will, and Charlotte watched it happen and filed it carefully away and said nothing. "You must tell me," Isabel said to Charlotte over the second course with the tone of a woman bestowing a compliment, "how you've managed to take hold of things here so quickly." I heard from Eleanor Whitfield that you've been running the mill accounts yourself. I have, Charlotte said. How extraordinary. Most women would find that a small, warm laugh. Overwhelming. I find numbers calming, Charlotte said. They don't lie. They don't perform. They just tell you what's true. Something flickered in Isabel's expression. Quick and gone. How very practical, she said. Yes, Charlotte agreed. I am. Under the table, she felt something brush her hand. She looked down. Nathaniel's hand had moved from his side of the table just slightly, and his fingers were resting against hers. He was not looking at her. He was listening to something Isabel was saying. His face was turned away, but his hand was there. She did not move hers. 3 days after Isabel's arrival, Charlotte woke at 5 in the morning to find a letter that had been slid under her bedroom door. She recognized the handwriting on the outside before she opened it. Her father's, the formal penmanship he used when he wanted to appear composed. Inside it said, Charlotte, I am aware that Hayes has blocked direct communication with you through normal channels. I am also aware of the situation currently in your household regarding Mrs. Ford. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? I wonder how secure your position really is. I have retained legal counsel regarding the terms of your marriage contract. You would be wise to reconsider our previous conversation. There is still time to resolve this in a way that benefits everyone. Your father. Charlotte read it twice. Then she folded it, put it in the inner pocket of her jacket, and went downstairs to start work. She did not tell Nathaniel. Not yet. She needed to understand what exactly her father thought he had. She spent 2 days pulling every document related to her marriage contract out of the Hayes estate records. The original agreement, the terms, the correspondence between her father and Nathaniel's lawyers in the months before the wedding. She read all of it. And on the second day she found something that made her sit very still in the mill office for a long time with her hand flat on the page. There was a clause, buried in paragraph 18 of the original agreement, written in legal language dense enough that a person reading quickly, a person who had been handed these documents the day before her wedding and told to sign, which was what had happened to her, might not notice it. The clause said that in the event of a dissolution of the marriage within 2 years, a portion of the Hayes estate holdings land, not money but land acreage on the western boundary, would revert to the Monroe family as a compensatory settlement. Her father hadn't traded her to clear his debts. He had traded her to acquire land. The marriage had been a land acquisition strategy from the beginning, and Charlotte had been the instrument of it, and she had not known. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her pen and started writing. She had the outline of a legal counter-argument drafted by the time Teague arrived at the mill office that morning. He came in, looked at her face, and stopped. Ma'am, what's happened? Mr. Teague, she said. Do you know a lawyer in Harrowfield who is not connected to the Hayes family's regular legal firm? He thought about it. There's a man named Patterson, younger. He's new to the county, set up practice about a year ago. I've heard he's sharp. Can you get him here today? Today, she said. Teague left and came back 90 minutes later with a young man who was indeed sharp, quick-eyed, quick to listen, and smart enough to read the clause. Charlotte showed him and understand its implications without having to be walked through it. This is very deliberately buried, Patterson said. Yes. Your father's lawyers wrote this. Yes. Does your husband know about it? Charlotte was quiet. I don't know, she said. That's what I need to find out. She looked at Patterson. But before I talk to my husband about this, I need to know what my legal position is independently, not as his wife, as Charlotte Monroe. What are my options? Patterson looked at her. Then he looked at the documents spread across the table. Give me 2 hours, he said. She was still in the mill office when Nathaniel found her. It was past 6 in the evening. Patterson had gone. The lamp was lit. The documents were organized into 3 precise stacks in front of her, and she had been sitting there for a while, long enough that the room had gone from late afternoon light to near dark around her, thinking about what she was going to say. Nathaniel came in without knocking, which was unusual. He looked at her. He looked at the documents. He looked at her face. He sat down in the chair across from her. He waited. She had learned that about him too. When he sensed something serious, he waited. He did not press. He simply made room, the way a man who has learned that pressing people closes them off will do. She respected that. She pulled the letter out of her jacket and set it on the table between them. He read it. His face did not change while he read it, but something around his eyes went still in the particular way things go still when a man is controlling his response very carefully. He set the letter down. He wrote to you. Slipped it under my door 3 days ago. You've been sitting on this for 3 days. I needed to understand the situation first, she said. I needed to read the marriage contract. A pause. All of it, he said. All of it. She looked at him directly. Paragraph 18, Nathaniel. The way he looked at her then was different from anything she had seen from him before. Not guilty, not defensive. Something more complicated than both of those, a man confronted with something he had known was there and had not addressed and was now being asked to account for. When were you going to tell me? She said. He stopped. Did you know about the land clause before you signed? Yes, he said. And then before she could speak, I agreed to it because at the time the acreage in question was of minimal strategic value, and your father was insistent, and my lawyers advised me it was unlikely to ever be triggered. He met her eyes. I did not know it would matter. It matters to me, she said. Not because of the land. Because I was the instrument of a land transaction, and no one thought to tell me. Silence. You're right, he said. I know I am. Charlotte. I'm not finished, she said. Her voice was level. It cost her something to keep it level, but she kept it. I have spent 37 days in this house working as though this were my home, working as though my contribution here was real and visible and valued, working as though I were a partner in this place and not a transaction. She looked at him steadily. I need to know which one I am. The silence stretched. Outside, something moved in the yard. Neither of them looked. Nathaniel Hayes looked at Charlotte across the table, full of documents she had found and read and understood and acted on. And she watched him arrive at something she could see it happening the moment a man moves from where he has been to somewhere he has not been before. You are not a transaction, he said. Then act like it, she said. Another silence. Then he reached across the table and picked up the letter from her father. I'm sending this to my lawyers tonight, he said, and I'm going to have that clause removed from the contract by the end of the week. He set the letter down. But I'd like you to be in the room when I do. She looked at him. Why? She said. Because it concerns you, he said. And because you'll catch anything the lawyers miss. She held his gaze. Something was building between them, quiet and careful and unannounced. The way real things build not with declarations or grand gestures, but with moments like this one with a man who says, because it concerns you, like it is the most natural thing in the world. Like a woman being in the room when her own life is being decided is simply obvious, like it has always been obvious, like he cannot imagine why it would not be. I'll be there, she said. He nodded. He stood. He picked up his hat, and then, at the door, he stopped. He turned back. Isabel Ford is leaving tomorrow, he said. Charlotte said nothing. I asked her to, he said. 2 days ago. She pushed back. He looked at Charlotte with those gray, unreadable eyes that were. She was beginning to realize, not unreadable at all, simply written in a language she was still learning. I told her the house was no longer set up to accommodate extended guests. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. How did she take that? She said. Poorly, he said. And there was something in the way he said it dry, precise, 3 letters doing the work of a longer sentence that made her recognize the humor in him. The small and careful humor he kept packed down beneath all that control, and she felt something shift in her chest that was warm and quiet and a little dangerous. Good night, Nathaniel, she said. Good night, Charlotte, he said. He left. She sat alone in the mill office for another few minutes, her hands still on the table, the documents in their 3 careful stacks, the lamp burning low. Her father had written her a letter designed to make her feel unstable, uncertain, like the ground beneath her position could give way at any moment. But he had miscalculated, because Charlotte Hayes had spent the last 37 days turning uncertain ground into something she had built herself. Board by board, ledger entry by ledger entry 1, signed contract at a time. And she was not done building, not even close. Patterson came back on a Thursday with documents that changed everything. Charlotte was in the mill office when he arrived, and she knew from the way he walked fast, deliberate with his hat already in his hand before he reached the door, that whatever he had found was not small. He sat down across from her and put 3 pages on the table. "I went to the county records office," he said. "I pulled every filing associated with the Monroe family over the past 4 years." He tapped the first page. "Your father didn't just negotiate the land clause into your marriage contract. He's been using it." Charlotte looked at the page. "Using it how?" she said. "He showed it to a creditor in Richmond 6 weeks ago as collateral," Patterson said. "He borrowed against the future value of that western acreage, against land he doesn't own and won't own unless your marriage dissolves within the 2-year window." He leaned forward. "Charlotte, your father is not trying to pressure you into giving him money. He's trying to pressure you into leaving your husband." The room went very quiet. She looked at the documents. She looked at the numbers. She traced the logic of it the way she traced every set of numbers methodically, without panic, following each thread to where it led. It led somewhere she had not expected. "If I leave Nathaniel," she said slowly, "or if Nathaniel dissolves the marriage, the land clause triggers," Patterson said. "Your father collects the western acreage. He's already sold the promise of it. He needs it to materialize, or he defaults on the Richmond loan and loses everything he has left." She sat back. "He sent Isabel Ford," she said. Patterson blinked. "I'm sorry. A woman arrived at the house 3 weeks ago, an old acquaintance of my husband's. She arrived with 3 trunks and the clear intention of staying." Charlotte looked at Patterson. "My father sent her, or arranged for her to come, or both." Patterson was quiet for a moment. "Can you prove that?" he said. "Not yet," she said. "But I will." She stood up. "I need to see Nathaniel," she said. "Now." She found him in the main house study, which was where he spent his mornings when he wasn't at the mill working through correspondence, reviewing accounts, doing the 1,000 quiet administrative tasks that kept a large estate functioning. He looked up when she came in without knocking and registered something in her face that made him put down his pen immediately. "Sit down," she said. She didn't mean it as a command. It came out that way. He sat. She put Patterson's documents on the desk and stood across from him while he read them. She watched his face the way she always watched faces when information was moving through them, looking for what the expression tried to hide, looking for what it revealed without meaning to. What she saw was anger, not the hot, loud kind. The cold, controlled kind, the kind that sits in a man's jaw and in the way he turns a page, and in the particular quality of his stillness when he reaches the line that confirms what he already half suspected. He read all 3 pages. He set them down. He said, "He used my own contract against me." "Against both of us," Charlotte said. He looked up at her. "He needed you to fail," she said. "Either you leave or I leave, or he manufactures enough doubt between us that the marriage collapses on its own. Any of those outcomes gives him the land." She held his gaze. "Isabel Ford was not a coincidence, Nathaniel." Something moved across his face. It was brief, and she almost missed it, a man arriving at a conclusion he did not want to arrive at. "You think I knew her well enough that her arrival would—" "I think my father researched you before he ever approached you with the marriage arrangement," Charlotte said. "I think he found out about her. I think he waited until we had been married long enough for the household to have some stability, and then he sent her to destabilize it." Nathaniel stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. "I should have removed that clause," he said. "Yes," she said. "I should have told you about it from the beginning." "Yes." He turned around. Charlotte. I'm not here to assign blame, she said. I'm here because we have a problem, and I have the beginning of a solution, and I need to know if you trust me enough to let me pursue it. He looked at her. Tell me the solution, he said. I want to go to Richmond, she said. I want to find the creditor my father borrowed from, and I want to see the terms of that loan. If the loan is built on fraudulent collateral on land my father cannot legally deliver, then the creditor has been defrauded. That changes the legal picture entirely. Silence. That's... He stopped. Risky, she said. Yes, but less risky than waiting for my father to make his next move. She folded her hands. He's going to come here again, Nathaniel. He came once for money and once to destabilize us. The third time will be something bigger. I'd rather we understand the full shape of what he's built before that happens. Nathaniel studied her. You'd go to Richmond alone, he said. I'd take Teague and Patterson. You'd take me, he said. It was not a question. She looked at him for a moment. All right, she said. I'll take you. They left for Richmond on a Monday, and they were back by Friday. And in between those 5 days, Charlotte Munro dismantled her father's scheme with the same patient precision she had brought to every account book and every sourcing contract and every negotiating table she had ever sat at. The creditor in Richmond was a man named Aldous Garrett, and he had not known that the collateral Charles Munro had offered him was fraudulent. He had believed, based on the documents Munro had shown him, that the land clause in the Hayes marriage contract was valid and executable on Munro's initiative, that Munro could trigger the clause whenever he chose. He had not known that the clause only triggered on dissolution of the marriage, which Munro could not force. When Patterson explained this to Garrett, the man went pale. When Charlotte then put the actual contract language in front of him, Garrett went very still. He showed me a summary, Garrett said. Not the full contract. He showed you what he needed you to see, Charlotte said, and he hid the rest. Garrett looked at the documents. He looked at Charlotte. He looked at Nathaniel, who had been standing against the wall this entire time with his arms crossed and his expression communicating exactly nothing. What do you want? Garrett said. We want the loan agreement canceled, Charlotte said, formally, in writing. And we want a sworn statement from you, documenting what Munro represented to you, and what the actual contract terms are. She paused. In exchange, the Hayes family will not pursue a fraud claim against Munro through your firm. You were deceived. We understand that. And Munro himself. Munro, Charlotte said, is our concern. She simply arrived at the boarding house in Harrowfield, where he had taken a room. She had learned he was staying there from Polly, who had heard it from the stable hand, because information travels in small towns along routes that have nothing to do with official channels, and she walked in and found him at breakfast and sat down across from him. He looked up and went very still. She put copies of the Richmond documents on the table beside his coffee cup. Garrett has withdrawn the loan, she said. He's provided a sworn statement. You borrowed against collateral you could not deliver, and you misrepresented the terms of a legal contract to a creditor. That is fraud, father. You know it is. Charles Munro looked at the documents. He looked at her, and for the first time since she was a small girl watching him in that mirror, she saw him look at her really look, not the proprietary assessment she was used to, not the calculating glance of a man measuring the value of what he owned, but see her, the actual her. The woman she had become in the months since she had walked into a church in Harrowfield in a plain white dress and told herself she was done expecting anything from anyone. He saw her, and what she saw on his face in response was something she had never expected. He was afraid. Not of the consequences, not of legal proceedings, something more fundamental. I was afraid of her. What do you want? He said. His voice was smaller than she had ever heard it. I want you to stop, she said. No more letters, no more visits, no more schemes built on my marriage or my husband's land or my position in that house. She held his gaze. I am not your asset, father. I was never your asset. You never understood that, but I'm going to say it plainly one time, so there is no ambiguity between us. I am a person. I am not a transaction. And I am done being used as one. A long silence. Her father looked at the documents again. "You'll ruin me," he said. "I haven't filed anything," she said. "I told Garrett we wouldn't pursue it if the loan was canceled, which it is." She stood. "You have a chance to rebuild your life honestly. I'd advise you to take it." She left him there. She did not look back. She was quiet on the ride back to the estate. Nathaniel, who had driven the carriage himself and given the driver the morning off without explanation, did not push her to speak. He understood her silences by now, understood that this one was not sadness or defeat, but something more like the particular exhaustion of putting something down that you have been carrying for a very long time. They were halfway home when he said, "How do you feel?" "Strange," she said. "I thought it would feel like more than it does." "More what?" "More finished." She looked out at the road. "I've been waiting to be free of him my whole life, and now I've done the thing that comes closest to it, and I just feel—" She stopped. "Tired," he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "That's because you did the work," he said. "People who fight hard for something are too tired to celebrate it right away. The feeling comes later." She looked at him. "That sounds like personal experience," she said. He kept his eyes on the road. "It is," he said. She looked at him a moment longer. Then she looked back at the road ahead of them, and the fields were green in the morning light, and somewhere behind them, her father was sitting at a boarding house breakfast table with documents he had not expected, and somewhere ahead of them was a house that was, as of today, genuinely and completely hers. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes. Thank you. For Richmond." He said nothing for a moment. "You didn't need me there," he said. "You had Patterson. You had the documents. You knew exactly what you were doing." "No," she said. "But I was glad you were there." Another silence. "I was glad to be there," he said in the quiet way he said things that cost him something. She did not push it further. Some things were said better slowly. The third time her father came to the Hayes estate, he came without announcement, and he came in a state that Charlotte had seen only twice before in her life. The state that came when Charles Monroe had run out of calculations, and only the raw, cornered animal was left. It was a Saturday evening. Charlotte and Nathaniel had just come in from the mill they had taken to walking back together most evenings. A habit that had formed without discussion, and that neither of them had remarked on, and they were still in the front hall. Charlotte pulling off her gloves, Nathaniel hanging his coat when the front door opened again and her father walked in. He had not knocked. He had never learned to knock at doors he considered his to enter. "Charlotte." He walked past Nathaniel as though he were furniture and stopped in front of her. His eyes were different tonight, not calculating, not performing. Something stripped back. Something raw and reckless, and she realized with a cold clarity, not entirely sober. "We need to talk." "You need to leave," she said. "I have nothing left," he said. "Do you understand me?" "Nothing. The Richmond loan was my last." He stopped, ran a hand over his face. "You took everything. You built everything on what wasn't yours," she said. "That is not the same thing as me taking it. I am your father. You are a man who sold his daughter and then tried to profit from the sale 3 different ways," she said. "I am done calling that fatherhood." He grabbed her arm. Not a strike. Not yet. A grip the way he had gripped her arm when she was small, and he wanted her to stand still and listen. The grip that had always communicated, "You do not get to leave until I am finished." She did not pull away. She had learned hard slow over years that pulling away made it tighter. But Nathaniel crossed the hall in 4 strides and had his hand around Charles Monroe's wrist before another second passed. "Let go of her," he said. His voice was low. It was the same voice he had used the first time, "Get out of my house," and it had the same quality, the quality of a door being closed and locked from the outside. Her father looked at Nathaniel's hand on his wrist. He released Charlotte's arm, but he did not step back. And something in his face, the recklessness, the rawness, the stripped-back thing that had nothing left to lose, shifted into something uglier. "You think you know her," he said to Nathaniel. Low, almost conversational. You think she's this capable, composed woman who appeared in your house and fixed your accounts, and you think that's real." He smiled. The smile of a man about to say something he believes is a weapon. "Let me tell you what she is. She's a girl who begged me to let her stay home instead of going to the Whitmore school because she had no friends. She's a girl who cried herself to sleep for a year after her mother died and couldn't function. She's nothing without someone to—" "Stop," Nathaniel said. "Without someone telling her where to go and what to—" "Stop." His voice was still quiet, but Charlotte heard something in it she had not heard before. Not the controlled cold of a man managing his response. Something more fundamental. Something more personal. "You will not speak about my wife that way in my house." "Your wife," her father said. "Your arrangement, your contract. Don't pretend you—" "She rewrote your contract," Nathaniel said. "She found the clause you hid in paragraph 18. She traveled to Richmond and dismantled the fraudulent loan you built on it. She did that in 6 weeks." He looked at Charles Monroe with something in his eyes that was beyond contempt, something quieter and more absolute. "You have spent 24 years trying to diminish her, and she has outmaneuvered you completely. I suggest you think carefully about who is nothing." Charles Monroe stared at him. Then he looked at Charlotte, and what she saw on her father's face then was not rage and was not calculation. It was something she had never seen directed at her before, something she hadn't known he was capable of. It was shame, real shame. The kind that arrives when a person is made to see themselves clearly and does not like what they find. It lasted only a moment. Then it was gone, and he was just a tired, diminished man standing in a hallway that wasn't his. "I have nowhere to go," he said, quietly. The performance was gone, all of it. What was left was old and small and oddly honest. "Charlotte, I have nothing." She looked at him. She had waited her whole life for him to look like this. She had imagined in the dark private parts of her mind that it would feel like victory, like the closing of something long and painful. It felt like neither. It just felt sad. "I'll arrange a monthly sum," she said. "Enough to live simply. Through the estate accounts, not from Nathaniel's personal holdings. From the mill profits which I manage." She held his gaze. "It will continue as long as you stay away from this house and out of our lives. The moment you contact either of us, or any member of this household, or attempt any further legal action, it stops, and Patterson files the Richmond documents." Her father was silent. "That's the offer," she said. "It's the only one." He nodded. Once. Then he picked up his hat, which had fallen to the floor when Nathaniel grabbed his wrist, and he walked to the front door and opened it and went out. Charlotte stood very still. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel breathe. "Charlotte," he said. "I'm all right," she said. "I know," he said. "But look at me anyway." She turned. Howe was standing in the middle of the hall, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never quite seen on him before. Open in a way that his face almost never was. The controlled precision softened into something that had no calculation in it at all. "What you just did," he said. "It was practical," she said. "It wasn't," he said. "It was—" He stopped, looked for the word. "It was generous. He doesn't deserve your generosity." "No," she agreed. "But I don't want to become someone who withholds it because of who deserves it. That's not who I am." He looked at her, for a long time. "No," he said very quietly. "It isn't." And then he did something she had not expected. He reached out and took her hand. Not the way he had under the lunch table, brief, almost accidental, deniable. Fully. His hand around hers, his thumb moving once across her knuckles, deliberate and certain. She looked down at their joined hands. She looked up at him. "Charlotte," he said, "I owe you an apology." "For what specifically?" she said. "For every day of this marriage that I spent treating you like a contract rather than a person." His voice was steady, but there was an effort in the steadiness she could hear now, the same effort she made every time she wanted to be heard clearly and had to hold herself very still to manage it. "For not telling you about paragraph 18. For not seeing you as clearly as I should have from the beginning." She was quiet for a moment. "You see me now," she said. Yes, he said. I do. Another moment. That's enough, she said. For now, that's enough. He did not release her hand. She did not pull it away. They stood in the hallway of the house that was both of theirs and let that be what it was, without rushing it and without diminishing it, for as long as it needed to last. It was Polly who came to Charlotte 3 days later, and it was Polly who told her the thing that changed the shape of everything again. She came to the mill office in the early morning before anyone else had arrived, and she looked like someone who has spent the night deciding whether to speak. "Ma'am," she said, "I need to tell you something." Charlotte looked up. "I should have told you sooner," Polly said. "I didn't know if it was my place, and I was afraid." "Tell me now," Charlotte said. "Mrs. Ford," Polly said, "before she left, I was bringing fresh towels to the guest room and the door wasn't fully closed and I heard her talking." She stopped. "To whom?" Charlotte said. "To a man, outside the window, a man on horseback." Polly's hands were twisted together. "I only heard pieces. But ma'am, she said your father's name. And she said the word letter. And she said when the time is right, we move." The mill office was very quiet. "You're certain?" Charlotte said. "Yes, ma'am." Charlotte stood. She thought about Isabel Ford arriving with 3 trunks. She thought about her father's letter appearing under her door 3 days into Isabel's visit. She thought about the timing, how precise it had been, how calculated, how it had landed in the exact window when Isabel's presence would have created the most doubt. She thought about the man on horseback. "Polly," she said, "could you describe the man?" Polly described him. Charlotte crossed the mill office and opened the door and stood in the morning air and thought about what she was holding. Isabel Ford had not been sent by her father. Or rather, her father had not sent Isabel alone. Isabel had come willingly, had her own reasons, had a man she was coordinating with who was not Charles Monroe, which meant there was someone else in this, someone she hadn't found yet. She went back inside. She sat down. She picked up her pen. She began to write. She had the answer by nightfall, and it came from the most unlikely source. The county deed records that Patterson had initially pulled when they were looking into her father's land dealings. She had been through those records twice, but she had been looking for her father's name. This time she looked for Isabel Ford's, and there it was, a deed of interest filed, 8 months ago on a parcel of land adjacent to the Hayes western boundary. The same western boundary where the acreage in the disputed clause sat, a parcel currently owned by a partnership that included as a silent investor one, James Alderton Ford, Isabel's husband. Charlotte sat with that for a long time. Isabel Ford's husband had a financial interest in land adjacent to the Hayes western acreage. If the land clause triggered, if the Monroe family acquired the Hayes land through the marriage dissolution, then the combined Ford-Monroe parcel would control the entire western water access for 3 additional farms. It was not about her father at all. Her father had been used too. He had been a tool. The same way. Charlotte had been a tool, handed a scheme that appeared to serve him and was actually serving someone else's purpose entirely. She closed the deed records. She sat in the lamplight in the mill office that had become over months of mornings and evenings and late nights and early starts the truest home she had ever had. And she thought, I have been looking at this from the inside. I need to put it in front of everyone at once. She knew what she needed to do. She needed a courtroom. She needed all of them in the same room at the same time. Her father Garrett Patterson's documents, the deed records, the connection between Ford and Monroe, and she needed a judge who would listen. She needed to end this publicly and permanently in the way that things in this county ended permanently. Not quietly, not through private arrangements and letters under doors. She needed to walk into that courtroom and put everything on the table and let the truth do what truth did when it was laid out completely in good light. She was not afraid. She had the documents. She had the evidence. She had learned in 7 months of running a household and a mill and 11 supply contracts and 1 very complicated marriage that she was more than capable of standing in any room and being the most prepared person in it. She blew out the lamp. She walked back to the house through the dark Kentucky evening, through the fields she had come to know the way. You know, a place you have decided to stay in, past the mill and past the north fence line and up through the kitchen garden. Nathaniel was still awake. She could see the light in the study window. She went inside and knocked on the study door and opened it. He looked up. "We need to go to court," she said. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at the expression on her face, the clarity of it, the settled certainty of a woman who has found the full shape of a problem and is ready to dismantle it completely. He closed the book on his desk. "Tell me everything," he said. Patterson filed the court petition on a Monday morning, and by Monday afternoon, half of Harrowfield knew about it. Charlotte had expected that. Small counties ran on information, the way mills ran on water, constantly, efficiently, and in every direction at once. She had not tried to keep it quiet. Quiet was her father's tool. Quiet was what men like James Ford counted on, the assumption that a woman with something to prove would prefer to handle it privately, would shrink from the public eye, would choose the back room over the courtroom, because back rooms felt safer. She was done with back rooms. Patterson came to the mill office Tuesday morning with the look of a man carrying news that cuts both ways. "The hearing is set for 3 weeks out," he said. "Judge Harlan Marsh. He's been on the county bench 11 years. Fair man. Not easy, but fair." "What's the other side?" Charlotte said. She had learned to ask Patterson for the full picture immediately, because Patterson, left to his own instincts, led with the good news. He sat down. "Ford has retained counsel. A firm out of Lexington, Beaumont and Associates. They're expensive and they're good." "How good?" "Good enough that they've beaten the Hayes family lawyers twice in land disputes over the past decade." Charlotte looked at him. "Then we won't use the Hayes family lawyers," she said. Patterson blinked. "Ma'am, we'll use you," she said, "and I'll sit at the table." "Charlotte." He stopped himself, started again. "Mrs. Hayes, the court is not going to look favorably on a woman presenting her own case. On a woman presenting anything. Judge Marsh is fair, not progressive." "I'm not asking to argue the law," she said. "I'm asking to present the financial evidence, the account records, the deed filings, the Richmond loan documents. That's not legal argument, that's fact. Numbers on a page." She held his gaze. "Can a witness present facts in Judge Marsh's courtroom?" Patterson was quiet for a moment. "A witness can," he said. "Then I'll be a witness," she said. "The most prepared one that courtroom has ever seen." He looked at her for a long time. "All right," he said. "But we need to build this carefully. Every document in sequence. Every connection established before we put it in front of the judge." He pulled out a notepad. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything in order, and don't leave anything out." She told him. It took 4 hours. When she finished, Patterson put down his pen and looked at the 14 pages of notes in front of him and said, "Charlotte, this is one of the most deliberately constructed frauds I have seen in 11 years of practice." "I know," she said. "Ford's lawyers are going to come after your credibility." "I know that too. They're going to say you're a woman with a grudge against her father. They're going to say you're acting out of spite. They're going to say—" "Let them say it," she said. "The documents don't have a gender." Patterson looked at her. Then he almost smiled. "No," he said. "They don't." The 3 weeks before the hearing were the most intense of Charlotte's life, and she had not lived a quiet life. She spent mornings in the mill office and afternoons at the kitchen table with Patterson, building the case document by document, connection by connection. Nathaniel sat in on every session from the second week onward, not directing, not interfering, simply present in the chair to her left, reading whatever she put in front of him, asking questions that were sharp and useful, and occasionally caught something she and Patterson had both missed. On the 8th day of preparation, he caught something that changed the shape of the entire case. They were going through the Ford deed records for the 3rd time, tracing the timeline of James Ford's land acquisition, when Nathaniel leaned forward and tapped a date on the page. "This deed was filed 6 weeks before your father approached me about the marriage arrangement," he said. Charlotte looked at the date. She looked at Patterson. Patterson looked at the date. The silence in the kitchen was very loud. "Ford acquired the adjacent parcel first," Charlotte said slowly. Before my father came to Nathaniel. Which means the marriage arrangement wasn't your father's idea, Nathaniel said. Or not originally. She sat back. Ford had seen the opportunity first. Ford had understood that if he could get the Hayes Western acreage either through direct purchase, which Nathaniel would never agree to, or through a manufactured land clause in a marriage contract, which required a desperate man with a marriageable daughter, he could control the entire Western water access. He had found her father. He had funded her father's approach to Nathaniel. He had built the entire scheme from the outside, in using Charles Monroe as his instrument, the same way Charles Monroe had used Charlotte. My father didn't even know he was being used, she said. That doesn't excuse what he did, Nathaniel said. No, she agreed. But it means Ford is the one who built this. My father was a tool. An expensive, damaging, reckless tool, but a tool. Patterson was already writing. This changes the primary defendant in the filing, he said. We've been treating your father as the architect, but the architect is Ford. Can we prove it? Charlotte said. We can prove the timeline, Patterson said. The deed date is public record. The loan documents from Richmond show that Ford's name appears as a co-guarantor on 2 of your father's debts. I missed that the first time through I was looking for direct connections. He was writing fast now. If Ford co-guaranteed Monroe's debts, he had financial leverage over your father. He wasn't just a co-conspirator. He was a creditor who controlled a debtor. Charlotte looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at her. He owned my father, she said. The same way my father thought he owned me. The night before the hearing, Charlotte could not sleep. She lay awake and went through the documents in her mind, the way she went through account ledgers methodically in sequence, checking each entry against the one before it. Every connection, every date, every name. She was not afraid of the courtroom. She was not afraid of Ford's Lexington lawyers. She was not afraid of Judge Marsh, who was fair, but not easy. What she was afraid of. The thing she would not say aloud, the thing she turned over in the dark and looked at carefully, was that she would stand in that room and be exactly as prepared as she was, and it would not matter. That the documents would not be enough. That being right would not be enough. That a woman standing up in a Kentucky courtroom in 1817 and saying, I have the evidence, and I understand it better than anyone else in this room, would run up against something that no amount of preparation could overcome. She had lived in that possibility her whole life. The possibility that competence was not sufficient. That being right was not the same as being heard. She was still awake at 2 a.m. when she heard a knock at her bedroom door. She sat up. Come in, she said. Nathaniel opened the door. He was still dressed, which told her he hadn't slept either. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. You're not sleeping, he said. Neither are you, she said. He came in and sat in the chair beside the window, the chair she used when she read in the evenings, and he looked at her and said, Tell me what you're thinking. I'm thinking about whether being right is enough, she said. In a court of law. In that particular court of law. With that particular judge. And those particular lawyers across the table. He was quiet for a moment. It's not enough on its own, he said. You know that. Yes. But you're not going in alone, he said. Patterson knows the law. Teague has agreed to testify about the mill operations. Garrett from Richmond has provided his sworn statement, and I'll be in that room. He held her gaze. Whatever Ford's lawyers say about you, they'll have to say it in front of me. She looked at him. That shouldn't matter, she said. My credibility shouldn't depend on whose wife I am. No, he said. It shouldn't. But we are working in the world as it is not as it ought to be. He leaned forward slightly. What matters is that you know what you know. You found this. You built this case. Everything that goes into that courtroom tomorrow came from you. He held her gaze steadily. No one in that room, not Marsh, not Ford's lawyers, not Ford himself, will have spent more time with these documents than you. That's not nothing, Charlotte. That's everything. She looked at him for a long moment. Nathaniel, she said. Yes. When did you stop seeing as a contract? He was quiet for a long time. I'm not sure it was a single moment, he said finally. I think it was the document you left on the kitchen table. The contract framework. That was the first time I thought—" He stopped. Chose the words carefully the way he always did. "That was the first time I thought that whoever this woman is, she is not what I was told she was." "What were you told?" she said. "Your father told my lawyers you were quiet and manageable, and would cause no disruption." He said it without any expression on his face, but she heard what was underneath it. "He was trying to make you sound like furniture." "He usually did," she said. "He was wrong," Nathaniel said. "In every possible way, he was wrong." She held his gaze. "Go sleep," she said. "You need to be sharp tomorrow." "So do you." "I'll be sharp regardless," she said. "I always am." He almost smiled. "Yes," he said. "You are." He stood. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and turned back. "Charlotte, whatever happens tomorrow, it's going to go the way it should," she said, "because I've done the work." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "You have." He left. She lay back down. She closed her eyes. She slept. The Harrowfield County Courthouse was full. Charlotte had not expected that. She had known people would come, word had traveled far and fast as it always did, but the benches behind the bar were packed from one end to the other, and there were people standing along the walls, and when she walked in with Patterson on her left and Nathaniel on her right. The sound the room made was not quite silence, but the thing just before silence, a collective intake of breath, a hush, a held moment. She kept her chin level. She sat at the plaintiff's table. Ford's Lexington lawyers were already seated, two of them in expensive coats, with the arranged confidence of men who had done this many times and were certain of the outcome. One of them looked at Charlotte with the particular expression of a man looking at something he has already decided is not a serious obstacle. She looked back at him without expression. Ford himself sat behind his lawyers, a compact, well-dressed man of about 50, with careful eyes and the kind of controlled demeanor that Charlotte recognized immediately because she had spent years cultivating her own version of it. He was smart. She had known he would be smart. Stupid men did not build the kind of scheme he had built. She was smarter. He didn't know that yet. Judge Harlan Marsh came in, and the room stood and then sat, and the hearing began. The Lexington lawyers opened first as the defense, and they were good. They presented Ford as a straightforward businessman, a landowner with legitimate interests in the Western County property, who had been falsely implicated in what was at its core a domestic dispute between a woman and her father. They used the word domestic 3 times in the first 10 minutes. They used the phrase a wife's grievance twice. They talked about Charlotte's father as though he were the primary actor and Ford an unfortunate bystander. Patterson leaned over and whispered, "They're trying to make this about you and your father." "Let them," Charlotte whispered back. "They haven't seen the timeline yet." Patterson stood and made the opening argument for the plaintiff, and he was clear and methodical and precise, and when he sat back down, he looked at Charlotte, and she could see that he had done everything exactly right, and that it was now her turn. She was called as the first witness. She walked to the stand and sat and looked at Judge Marsh, a lean, gray-haired man with the face of someone who had heard a great many stories and retained the ability to distinguish truth from performance, and she was not afraid. Patterson walked her through the documents in the order they had rehearsed. Each one, each date, each connection. She answered his questions in plain language without legal jargon, the way she had learned to talk about numbers with people who didn't spend their lives in account books, clearly specifically making the abstract concrete. When Patterson finished his questions, the lead Lexington lawyer, his name was Sutherland, and he had the kind of polished manner that was designed to make witnesses feel like they had already made a mistake, stood and smiled at her. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "you've presented a great deal of paperwork this morning." "I've presented evidence," she said. A slight pause. He hadn't expected her to correct him immediately. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Now you are not a lawyer, is that correct?" "Correct." You have no formal training in law or finance." "I have no formal credentials," she said. "I have 6 years of practical experience managing the accounts of Monroe Banking and Trust, and 8 months managing the Hayes estate and mill operations. I have also spent the past 3 weeks examining every document relevant to this case. She held his gaze. Would you like to discuss any specific document? I can speak to all of them. Sutherland looked at her. In the gallery, someone coughed. The deed filing you referenced, Sutherland said. The one you used to establish Mr. Ford's involvement. You claim this was filed 6 weeks before your father approached Mr. Hayes. It was filed 6 weeks before, she said. The date is in the county record. It's in the document packet filed with this court. County records can be misread. They can, she said. Which is why I had Patterson pull the original filing and compare it to the copy. They match. The date is October 14th, 1816. Your client's deed of interest. It's on page 7 of the exhibit packet. Sutherland turned to his associate. A brief quiet exchange she could not hear. Then he turned back to her. Mrs. Hayes, isn't it true that you have a personal grievance against your father, that this entire proceeding is motivated by... My personal feelings about my father are not evidence, she said. The documents are evidence. If you'd like to challenge the documents, I'm happy to walk through each one. If you'd like to discuss my feelings, I'd suggest that's not what Judge Marsh is here to rule on. In the gallery, the silence broke. Not loudly, just a ripple, a murmur, the sound of a room recalibrating. Judge Marsh looked at Sutherland. Sutherland straightened his coat. Nothing further, he said. The twist came from a direction Charlotte had not anticipated, and it came from her father. Charles Munro was called as a witness by Ford's defense, a decision that Charlotte suspected Sutherland had made because he believed Munro would create confusion, would muddy the picture, would introduce enough emotional chaos that the clean line of the financial evidence would be hard to follow. He was wrong about what Charles Munro would do on that stand. Her father walked to the witness stand and sat down, and Sutherland began his questions, and Charlotte watched, and Nathaniel watched beside her, and Patterson's pen was ready. Sutherland established Munro's name and background, established his relationship to Charlotte, began building the narrative of a father caught between his business failures and his daughter's accusations, a sympathetic figure manipulated by a woman with a grudge. And then Judge Marsh asked a question, not Sutherland. The judge himself leaned forward and said in the plain, direct way of a man who has sat through too many performances, Mr. Munro, did you know when you presented the collateral to Mr. Garrett in Richmond that the land clause in your daughter's marriage contract required dissolution of the marriage to trigger? The courtroom went very still. Sutherland half rose. Your Honor. Sit down, counselor. Marsh kept his eyes on Munro. Mr. Munro, her father sat on that witness stand, and Charlotte watched something happen that she had never seen happen to Charles Beaumont Munro in her entire life. He ran out of performance. There was a moment she could see at the exact moment when the calculations failed and the masks ran out, and there was nothing left but the truth and the choice of whether to speak it. He looked at Sutherland. Sutherland gave him a very small, very slight shake of his head. Her father looked at Judge Marsh. Then he looked at Charlotte. She did not look away. She did not nod, did not encourage, did not ask him for anything. She simply looked at him the way she had looked at him across 1,000 tables and 1,000 silences, and she let him see her, the full, her the woman she had built herself into in the month since she had walked into a Kentucky church in a plain white dress, and she waited. Yes, her father said. I knew. Sutherland's pen hit the floor. I knew the clause only triggered on dissolution, her father said. His voice was flat, stripped. Ford explained the full structure to me when he proposed the arrangement. He told me that if the marriage failed within 2 years, the land would come to me, and I would use it to settle his purchase of the adjacent parcel. He stopped. I agreed because I had no other options. I believed that was true. I'm not certain anymore that it was. The room was absolutely silent. Judge Marsh looked at Ford. Ford's face was a controlled mask, but his hands on the table in front of him had gone very still. In the way hands go still when a man is deciding how much damage has just been done. Mr. Ford, Judge Marsh said, Your counsel will have an opportunity to respond. But I want you to understand that this court takes a very serious view of what has just been described. Sutherland was on his feet with objections. Patterson countered each one. The legal argument went back and forth for 20 minutes, and Charlotte sat at the plaintiff's table and listened and tracked every exchange and spoke quietly to Patterson whenever he needed to hear something she had caught that he hadn't. When the argument settled, Judge Marsh called a brief recess. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Nathaniel came to stand beside her. "Your father just told the truth," he said. "Yes," she said. "In the courtroom, under oath, against the advice of the defense counsel who called him." "Yes." "Why?" he said. She thought about it. "Because I looked at him," she said, "and he saw me." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "Is that enough?" he said. "After everything?" "No," she said, "but it's something." She looked down the hallway. "He's still my father. He did what he did. Both of those things are true at the same time." He was quiet. Then he said, "You are a more generous person than most." "I'm a practical person," she said. Generosity and practicality often look the same. The door opened and Patterson appeared. "We're back in," he said. "And Charlotte, Judge Marsh asked specifically that you return to the witness stand." She returned to the stand, and Judge Marsh looked at her with the eyes of a man who had been doing his job long enough to recognize when it walked into his courtroom something uncommon. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I have some questions of my own." "Of course, Your Honor." "The financial arrangement you've described the structure of the Ford Monroe scheme. Walk me through it in plain language, not legal language, as you would explain it to someone unfamiliar with the details." She looked at him. And she did. She explained it the way she explained account books to Polly and sourcing contracts to reluctant farmers and yield projections to bank representatives. Clearly, specifically, without condescension and without simplification. Treating her audience as people capable of understanding the truth if it was presented to them straight. She spoke for 12 minutes. When she finished, the courtroom was silent in a different way than it had been before. Not the silence of shock or of a room recalibrating, but the silence of people who have just understood something completely. Judge Marsh made a note. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes," he said. "You may step down." The ruling came the following morning. Judge Marsh ruled that the land clause in the Hayes-Monroe marriage contract had been inserted through material misrepresentation and was therefore unenforceable. He ruled that James Ford had engaged in a deliberate scheme to defraud both the Hayes family and Aldous Garrett, and referred the matter to the State Attorney General's office for further review. He ruled that Charles Monroe, having provided testimony that materially assisted the court, would be treated as a cooperating witness rather than a primary defendant, and he ruled in language that Patterson read aloud 3 times because he could not quite believe it was there, in plain black ink on official court paper, that Charlotte Avery Hayes, née Monroe, had provided the most comprehensive and clearly presented financial evidence he had encountered in 11 years on the county bench. He did not have to say that. It was not required language. It was not legal boilerplate. He put it in the ruling because he wanted to. Charlotte read it once. She set the paper down on the kitchen table. She put her hand flat on it. And she sat there for a moment in the kitchen of the house that was hers. Genuinely, legally, completely, unassailably. Hers. And she let herself feel the thing she had been too busy to feel for months. Not triumph. Not victory. Something quieter. The feeling of ground beneath her feet that would not give way. Polly came in from the hallway and stopped when she saw Charlotte's face and said, "Ma'am, are you?" "We won," Charlotte said. Polly let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh. Then she turned to the hallway and shouted, "Bess, Mrs. Aldrich, we won," and the kitchen filled with the sound of the household feet on floorboards. Voices overlapping the controlled chaos of people who have been holding their breath and can finally stop, and Charlotte sat in the middle of it and laughed, which she had not done in longer than she could remember. Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. He took in the room Polly with her hands over her mouth. Bess already crying. Mrs. Aldrich, standing very straight with something bright and wet at the corners of her eyes that she would never in 1,000 years call tears. He looked at Charlotte. She looked at him. "Paragraph 9 of Morrison's arbitration clause," she said. "Binding county mediation, 30-day window." He blinked. Then he understood she was referencing the sourcing contract. The first real conversation they had ever had the night they had sat at this table together, and he had asked for her fix, and she had given it, and he had said, "That's better than what I had." Something moved across his face that was warm and real and unguarded, the face underneath all that controlled precision, the face she had been learning to read for 8 months, one careful page at a time. "You were right about that too," he said. "I usually am," she said. He crossed the kitchen. He pulled out the chair across from her, the same chair, the same table, and he sat down. And he reached across and took her hand, the way he had in the hallway the night her father came for the last time. And this time, he did not let go for a long time. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes." "The western acreage," he said. "The land at the center of all of this. I want to do something with it." She looked at him. "The county has no school for the farming families on that side of the property," he said. "There are 43 children within 2 miles who have no formal education. I looked into it." He held her gaze. "I thought if you were interested, it might be something worth building." She stared at him. "A school," she said. "You understand numbers, you understand accounts, you understand how to build something that works." He looked at her steadily. "And you have been the most competent and most overlooked person in this county for 8 months. It seems to me that a woman who understands what it means to have ability and no outlet for it might know something about what to build for other people in the same situation." Her throat tightened. She looked down at their joined hands. She looked up at him. "You looked that up," she said. "The children, the distance, you counted them." "Yes," he said. "When 3 weeks ago," he said. "When you were in Richmond." She held his gaze and felt something move through her that she had no word for, yet something that was not yet complete, not yet named, but was unmistakably and irrevocably real. "I'm interested," she said. "Good," he said. Outside, the Kentucky morning was doing what it always did. Moving on. Indifferent, beautiful, and inside the kitchen. The household was settling back to its rhythms around them, and the ruling from Judge Marsh sat on the table between their joined hands, and Charlotte Avery Hayes looked at the man across from her and understood something she had not been prepared to understand when she walked into a church in a plain white dress 8 months ago. She was not just surviving here, she was living here. And the difference between those two things was everything. The school did not build itself. Charlotte had known it wouldn't. She had known from the moment Nathaniel said 43 children that what he was describing was not a gesture, but a project. And projects required the same thing. Every project she had ever undertaken required time precision and the willingness to sit with a problem long enough to understand its full shape before touching it. She started the way she always started, with a list, with numbers, with facts arranged in order on paper so she could see what she was working with. The western acreage had a structure already standing on it, an old grain storage building that had not been used since Nathaniel expanded the North Mill 3 years prior. Patterson confirmed the title was clear. Teague walked the property with her on a Tuesday morning and told her the foundation was sound, and the roof needed work, but not replacement, and the interior walls were solid. "You're thinking of converting it," Teague said. It was not quite a question. "I'm thinking about what 43 children need in a building," she said. "Light, space, somewhere to sit, somewhere to put books if we can get books." She walked the perimeter. "What do you think it would take?" Teague was quiet for a moment. She had learned that his silences were not hesitation, but calculation. He was a man who thought before he spoke, which she respected, because it meant that when he spoke, he meant it. 4 weeks, he said. 6 men. Materials I can source locally except for the window glass. He paused. Maybe 5 weeks for the glass. Get the glass ordered today, she said. We'll work around it. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. She had learned in 9 months at the Hayes estate that yes, ma'am meant different things from different people. From Teague, it had come to mean something close to, "I trust you," which was the hardest kind of trust to earn and the most valuable kind to hold. She was not going to waste it. The county had opinions about the school. The county always had opinions. Eleanor Whitfield came to call 3 days after word spread, and word spread in approximately 48 hours, because it always did, and she sat in the parlor with her hands folded and her expression carefully arranged into something that looked like concern, but was mostly curiosity with a judgmental undercoating. "It's a remarkable undertaking," Mrs. Whitfield said. "A school, on the western property." A small pause. "For the farming families." "For their children," Charlotte said. "Yes." "It's very charitable." "It's practical," Charlotte said. "Educated workers run better operations. Better operations produce better yields. Better yields mean a stronger county economy." She looked at Mrs. Whitfield pleasantly. Charity and practicality tend to point in the same direction if you follow them far enough. Mrs. Whitfield looked at her. "You intend to run it yourself," she said. "I intend to find it a qualified teacher," Charlotte said. "And to oversee the accounts and the curriculum development, yes." "The curriculum," Mrs. Whitfield repeated, as though the word tasted unusual. "Reading, writing, and arithmetic at minimum," Charlotte said. "I'd like to add basic accounting principles within the first year. Children who understand numbers early have options that children who don't understand numbers never get." A long pause. Then Mrs. Whitfield said carefully, "My niece studied in Philadelphia. She has been at loose ends since returning. She was looking for a position." Charlotte looked at her. "What did she study?" she said. "Literature primarily. But she has a gift for teaching. She taught at a small school in Philadelphia for 2 years before coming home." Mrs. Whitfield's chin lifted slightly, the way it does when a proud woman is offering something she hasn't quite admitted she wants to offer. "She is also, I am told, very good with arithmetic." Charlotte held her gaze for a moment. "Send her to me," she said. "I'd like to meet her." Mrs. Whitfield's expression did something complicated, and then settled into something that was unmistakably, and for the first time in Charlotte's experience of her, genuine. "I'll send her Thursday," she said. The teacher's name was Clara Whitfield, and she was 26. And she walked into the mill office on Thursday morning with the energy of someone who had been waiting a long time for someone to give her a real problem to solve. Charlotte liked her immediately. They talked for 2 hours. Charlotte asked questions and listened to the answers with the full attention she gave to account books and legal documents. Not performing interest, but actually interested, actually tracking, actually building a picture of who this woman was and what she could do. Clara had ideas. Good ones. She talked about how children learn differently about the importance of teaching numbers through practical application, rather than abstract repetition, about the reading materials she had developed in Philadelphia, that started with things children already knew and built from there. "You'd have full authority over the teaching methods," Charlotte told her. "I'll manage the building, the supplies, the accounts. You manage the classroom. And the curriculum," Clara said. "We build it together," Charlotte said. "You know children. I know what skills they'll need when they're grown." She paused. "Between us, we should be able to figure out the middle part." Clara looked at her for a moment. "Mrs. Whitfield told me you were remarkable," she said. "I thought she was being an aunt." "She was probably being both," Charlotte said. Clara laughed. It was a good laugh, unguarded, real. "I'll take the position," she said. "You haven't heard the salary yet," Charlotte said. "I trust it's fair," Clara said. "It's better than fair," Charlotte said. "I did the accounting." The school opened on the first Monday of the new year, and 41 children came. Not 43. 2 of the farming families on the outer edge of the western property had decided after much internal deliberation that Charlotte heard about through Teague, that a school run by a woman was not something they were prepared to send their children to. She had expected some version of this. She had not expected it to sting the way it did. She was standing outside the building on that first morning, watching the children arrive, most of them in their best clothes, most of them uncertain, some of them excited, a few of them clearly convinced they were walking into something designed to trap them, when Nathaniel came to stand beside her. He looked at the children. He looked at her face. 2 families, he said. Yes. Give it a month, he said. You think they'll change their minds? I think their children are going to come home from school and tell them what they learned, and the 2 families who didn't send their children are going to watch that happen every single day. He looked at her. Those 2 families are going to send their children. She looked at the building, at Clara through the window, organizing the children into their first morning. A month, she said. Maybe 6 weeks, he said. I didn't want to oversell it. She laughed. She hadn't meant to. It came out before she could arrange herself quick and genuine, and when she turned to look at him, his expression was doing the thing it did now with increasing frequency. The thing she had learned to read as the unguarded version of him, the face that didn't manage itself. He was looking at her like she was something worth looking at. Not as an assessment, not as a calculation. As a person he had chosen to look at. Come inside, she said. Clara's about to start the first lesson, and I want to see how she opens. You came to watch a lesson, he said. I came to learn what I don't know about teaching children, she said. Which is most things. She started toward the door. Are you coming? A pause. Then she heard his footsteps behind her. The first twist came at the end of that week, and it came in the form of a letter from the State Attorney General's office in Frankfurt. Patterson brought it to the mill office on a Friday afternoon and set it on the table in front of her without saying anything first, which told her it was significant. She opened it. James Ford had agreed to a settlement with the state. He would divest the adjacent western parcel, the land at the center of everything. The land his entire scheme had been built around acquiring, and he would pay a substantial financial penalty and relinquish 2 other landholdings in the county as part of the settlement. She read that twice. Then she read the next paragraph, which told her that the State Attorney General, in reviewing the Hayes case records, had identified the Hayes family as the primary victim of the Ford scheme, and recommended that the county consider the adjacent western parcel for public benefit acquisition. She looked up at Patterson. Public benefit, she said. The state can recommend that a county acquire the land at below market value for educational or civic purposes, Patterson said. He was trying to keep his expression neutral and not entirely succeeding. It's not common, but it's also not unprecedented. The parcel adjacent to the school, she said. Yes. If the county acquired it. At below market value, Patterson said. Which in this case would be approximately 30 cents on the dollar given the settlement terms. She sat very still. That's enough land to expand the school, she said. To add a second building, to create a proper yard for the children. She looked at him. Patterson. Is this actually possible? I've spent this morning determining that it is, he said. I wouldn't have brought it to you otherwise. She picked up the letter. She put it down. She stood. I need to talk to Nathaniel, she said. She found him at the North Mill, which was where she usually found him when she needed to find him quickly, and she came in and handed him the letter without preamble. He read it. He read it again. The adjacent parcel, he said. Yes. Ford's parcel. Yes. He looked at her. Something was moving behind his eyes, the calculation she had come to recognize the way his mind worked through implications, and arrived at conclusions with the efficiency of a man who had been making consequential decisions for 20 years. How much do we need to put in? He said. 30 cents on the dollar, she said. Patterson has the figures. It's manageable. For a school expansion. A proper one. 2 buildings. A yard. Eventually. She stopped herself. Eventually what? He said. She looked at him. I've been thinking about the farming women, she said. The mothers, the wives. Most of them have no more formal education than their children. If the school building is large enough, if we run morning sessions for children and evening sessions for... She stopped again. It's too much. We're all ready. It's not too much, he said. Nathaniel. It's not too much, he said again. He held her gaze. Tell me the full version, not the version you've edited because you think I'll say it's excessive. The full version of what you want to build. She looked at him. And she told him. She told him the full version. The children in the mornings. The women in the evenings. The basic accounting and literacy curriculum she had been outlining in the margins of her own ledger books. For 2 months, the idea of bringing in guest instructors for specialized skills, the possibility of connecting the school to the mill operations so that graduates had actual employment pathways. She talked for 15 minutes. When she finished, Nathaniel was quiet. "You've been carrying this for 2 months," he said. "I didn't want to ask for too much," she said. "You built this estate's profitability back up from a 15% shortfall," he said. "You negotiated 9 supply contracts in 3 weeks. You dismantled a land fraud scheme that had 2 lawyers and a creditor fooled. You presented financial evidence that a sitting county judge called the most comprehensive he had seen in 11 years. He looked at her steadily. "Charlotte, you can ask for too much." She held his gaze. "I know," he said quietly. "I know that's new. I know it doesn't feel safe yet." He reached across and took her hand, the gesture that had become theirs, the simple claiming of it, the hand around hers that said, "You are here, and I see you. Ask for what you want. I'll tell you if something genuinely can't be done. But I will not tell you that wanting it is too much." She looked down at their joined hands. Something in her chest shifted. Something that had been held carefully in place for a long time, braced against the habit of a lifetime. The learned expectation that wanting things led to disappointment, and wanting too much led to being used as an instrument of someone else's wanting. "I want to build something that lasts," she said. "Something that's here after we're gone. Something that means those 43 children, those 41 children grow up knowing they can be more than what they were born into." "Then that's what we build," he said. She looked at him. "You keep saying we?" she said. "Yes," he said. "I do." "When did that start?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "October 14th, he said. She blinked. "The deed date," she said. "The Ford deed date. That's when. That's when I understood that everything happening in my house had started before you arrived," he said. "That you had been handed a situation you hadn't chosen and hadn't created, and you had walked into it and started fixing it anyway, and you had never once asked me to feel sorry for you." He held her gaze. "That was when I understood who you were." The mill was quiet around them. Just the sound of the wheel and the water, and somewhere outside a wagon moving on the road. "I'm sorry it took me that long," he said. "It took me longer to trust it," she said. "So we're even." Something crossed his face that she recognized now as his version of joy contained precise real. "Even," he said. The 2 families sent their children in 5 weeks, not 6. 5. Nathaniel did not say "I told you so." He came to find her in the mill office the morning Teague told her, and he simply set a cup of coffee on the table beside her ledger and said, 43, and walked out. She sat with that for a moment. Then she went back to work. The school expansion broke ground in the spring, and the day the workers started on the second building's foundation. Something happened that Charlotte had not planned for and could not have anticipated. The 2 farming families who had initially refused to send their children, both of them independently on the same morning, came to the school building while Clara was running the morning session, and they asked if they could speak with Mrs. Hayes. Charlotte came out and found them standing together, which surprised her because she knew from Teague that the 2 families were not particularly friendly with each other, and the fact that they had arrived together suggested a conversation had happened beforehand that she had not been party to. The older of the 2 men, a rangy, sun-weathered farmer named Elias Cobb, who Charlotte knew from the supply contracts, turned his hat in his hands the way men did when they were approaching something uncomfortable and had decided to approach it anyway. "We owe you an apology, Mrs. Hayes," he said. She looked at him. "We said some things," he said, "when the school started, about whether a woman ought to be running such a thing, and whether our children should be part of it." "I heard," she said. "We were wrong," he said, simply. "The way a man who has made peace with a hard thing says it. My boy came home last week and showed me what he'd learned about measuring acreage. Did it faster in his head than I can do it with a paper and pen." He stopped. "My boy is 9 years old." Charlotte looked at him. "Mr. Cobb," she said. Your son is welcome any morning he wants to come. Cobb nodded. His jaw was tight in the way jaws get tight when a man is holding something that matters very close to the surface. Mrs. Hayes, he said. My wife, she heard about the evening sessions, for the women. He looked at her. She wants to come. Charlotte held his gaze. The first session is Thursday, she said. Tell her 7 o'clock. He nodded again, and then he did something she had not expected. He put out his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm and direct and equal. The handshake of a man shaking hands with a person he considers his equal. And in 24 years of her life, she could count on one hand the number of times a man had offered her that. She did not make nothing of it. The twist that came in the summer was the one she had been bracing for without knowing she was bracing for it, and it came from a direction she had not fully closed off. Isabel Ford. Not Isabel Ford anymore. Isabel Carmichael, newly separated from her husband, following the legal proceedings and the financial ruin that had followed them, wrote Charlotte a letter. Charlotte read it twice before she decided what to do with it. The letter was not what she expected. It was not a threat. It was not an attempt at reconciliation or an appeal for sympathy. It was in its strange way, honest, the honesty of a woman who has watched the scheme she participated in collapse entirely and is sitting in the wreckage of her own choices. I came to your house because James asked me to, the letter said. He told me it was business. I told myself I believed that. I was lying to myself, which I was very good at by then. I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I thought you should know that I have thought about what you built, and I have thought about who you are, and I find that I am in a way I did not expect proud of you. Not for winning. For the school. For the thing you built after you won. That is the part that matters, and I think you know it. Charlotte sat with that letter for a long time. Then she wrote back. She wrote 2 paragraphs. She said that she did not hold Isabel responsible for the scheme's design, that she understood the particular position of a woman who does what she's asked by a man who has made himself her only option. She said she hoped Isabel found solid ground. She said nothing about forgiveness, because she was not sure what she felt was forgiveness, and she had made herself a rule years ago about not saying things she wasn't sure of. She sealed the letter and gave it to Polly to post, and she did not think about it again. That was the work. That was all of it, not just the accounts and the contracts and the courtroom and the school. This too. The decisions about what to carry forward and what to set down. The choice made over and over about what kind of person to be when the crisis had passed and the ordinary days came back. On a Tuesday evening in late summer, Nathaniel came to find her in the mill office, which he did most evenings, now had done for months. The habit so established that Mrs. Aldrich had taken to leaving 2 cups on the kitchen table every morning without being asked, and he sat down across from her and looked at the ledger she was working through and said, "What are you doing?" "End of quarter accounts," she said. "The school fund is ahead of projection. We're going to be able to start the women's literacy collection a month early." "The books," he said. "Patterson found a bookseller in Lexington who specializes in educational materials." She turned the ledger to show him. "If we order now and take the bulk rate, we save 18%. He looked at the numbers. "Do it," he said. "I already did," she said. "I wanted you to see why." He looked up at her. "You ordered them before you showed me," he said. "The window on the bulk rate closed at noon," she said. "You were at the North Mill." "Charlotte?" "The numbers justified it," she said. "I know they did," he said. "I'm not objecting." Something moved in his face, the unguarded version, the one she had come to know, the way she knew the weight of a pen in her hand, or the rhythm of a ledger column. "I'm noting that you made a significant financial decision without consulting me." She looked at him. "Is that a problem?" she said. "No," he said. "It's correct. It was your call to make." He paused. "I just want you to know that I noticed, that you're doing that now, making decisions as though this is yours." She held his gaze. "It is mine," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." A pause. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About the way we run this place," he said. "The estate accounts, the mill, the school fund, you manage all of it. You've managed all of it for nearly a year." He looked at her steadily. "I'd like to make it official." She blinked. "Official how?" she said. "Joint signature on all financial instruments," he said. "My name and yours. Neither of us moves significant capital without the other's knowledge." He held her gaze. "Not because I don't trust your judgment. Because you've earned the full standing of it. Because the way we've been doing it, you managing and me being informed, isn't right. If the work is equal, the authority should be equal." She looked at him. In the silence, she could hear the mill wheel turning outside. She could hear faint and far the sound of the western road where the school building sat, and where tomorrow morning 43 children would arrive, and Clara would open the door, and another ordinary miraculous day would begin. "Equal," she said. "Yes," he said. "You're sure?" she said. "I've been sure for some time," he said. "I should have said it sooner." She looked at him for a long moment. This was the man who had stood at an altar and looked through her, who had said unlikely and walked away, who had taken 3 weeks to speak to her at dinner and 3 months to use her first name, who had moved across a hall without being asked and put himself between her and a raised hand and asked afterward if she was actually all right, who had counted 43 children and gone home and told her about them, who had said we build like it was the only sensible way to say it. She thought about the woman who had walked into that church in a plain white dress and told herself not to want things, who had kept her chin level and felt invisible and learned slowly, and then all at once, that invisible and unseen were not the same, that she had always been visible to anyone who bothered to look. He had looked, slowly, imperfectly, but fully, and so had she. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. "Joint signature," she said. "Have Patterson draw up the amendment." She looked back at the ledger, "and tell him to make it retroactive to October 14th. She heard him go still. Then she heard him say very quietly, "Charlotte." She looked up. "I love you," he said. 3 words. Delivered in the same plain, direct way. He said everything that cost him something, without decoration, without performance, with the precision of a man who says exactly what he means, because he has thought carefully about what he means and is ready to be accountable for it. She looked at him across the table, across the ledger books and the account records and the year of mornings and evenings and conversations and silences and contracts signed and frauds dismantled and children arriving at a school door and a hand reaching across a table to find hers. "I know," she said. He waited. She looked at him steadily, and she felt herself arrive fully and completely, without reservation, at the thing she had been moving toward for a year. Not cautiously, not with conditions, not the qualified provisional self-protective version of it that she had been constructing as a defense against wanting too much. The real thing. "I love you too," she said. "I have for some time. I should have said it sooner." He exhaled. It was a small sound, almost nothing. It was the sound of a man who has been holding something carefully for a long time and has just been told he can put it down. He reached across the table and took her hand. She turned her hand over and held his. Outside, the summer evening was settling over the Kentucky fields, over the mill and the north fence, and the western property, where a school building sat, with its new glass windows, and its 43 desks, and its second foundation going in. Over the road where wagon tracks led in every direction to farms whose contracts she had written and renegotiated, and whose families she had fought for in a courtroom without flinching. Over the house where Polly was setting the dinner table, and Bess was in the kitchen, and Mrs. Aldrich was doing whatever Mrs. Aldrich did in the late afternoon that she never explained and no one asked about. Over everything that Charlotte Avery Hayes had built. And she sat in the mill office in the last of the evening light, her hand in the hand of the man who had learned to see her, and she thought about the woman who had stood in a church in a plain white dress and thought she had nothing. That woman had been wrong. She had always had everything she needed. She had simply needed a place to put it down and let it grow. And now she had that too. Charlotte Monroe. Charlotte Hayes, the wife. Nobody wanted the woman who had walked into a cold house with 2 trunks and a satchel full of ledger books, and rebuilt everything she touched, had become in the end exactly who she had always been. Only now the whole world could see it. And that was never going to change again.